took my podcast, man.
I'm Peter Fonda. We've just finished making a movie dealing with the most talked about subject of the day, LSD. I honestly believe it will be today's most talked about motion picture.
The name of the picture is The Trip.
Here goes.
Oh, it gives off an orange cloud of light that just blows right out over the city.
Beauty you cannot believe inundate you.
Your world, the people world, is fragmented.
Distorted. Passion is a rainbow of ecstasy.
The messengers of death pursue.
Terrify you.
Oh, I don't want to die.
If that happens to you again, you go ahead and go with it. Just go ahead and die. Whatever happens.
The wildest of pleasures possess you.
It will blow your mind.
First off, Anthony, I got a few things I want to go over in this podcast, man. I want to get loaded, man, okay? Okay? I don't want to be bothered by the man anymore, okay? I want to get ripped, man. I want to get ripped during this podcast, man, okay? To quote Wild Angels.
It's going to be a wild podcast. We just want to ride our machines, man. It's like that line. That movie. All right, let's... Do you want to get us started? 3, 2, 1 us?
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to our podcast, The Robots Took My Podcast. I am Jordan.
And I am Anthony.
Anthony, we have a very special retrospective episode today. Who are we talking about? We're talking about somebody who passed away recently.
Yeah. Roger Corman, filmmaker, writer, director, producer, distributor, man about town, mentor, I don't know, list goes on. And yeah, he passed away this week. I don't know when this will be up, but hopefully soon. Yeah. And yeah, when we heard this, Jordan and I have talked about Roger Corman before, and I just thought it was appropriate that we have a quick retrospective episode to talk about the man, his career, and Jordan, what words come to mind when you hear Roger Corman's name?
When I hear Roger Corman's name, man, I mean, like you said, producer, director, writer, distributor, all of that. And just some of the movies he directed, come to mind. But then I picture him always as a producer, mostly a hands-on producer. And one must be insane to make a movie, and one must be insane and a crazy leader to make a movie. And Roger Corman was like kind of in between there. Yeah. That's what comes to mind. I am ill prepared for this podcast. There is so much to cover in his career. I feel like that's why I feel ill prepared, even with what few notes I have.
Yeah. The word that comes to mind for me is cheap. Not frugal.
Yeah.
Not tight.
Your answer is way better.
Penny pincher.
Yeah.
Cheap. And I think everybody that worked with him would certainly say that, and that's the thing you hear over and over again in interviews, whenever you read about him or people talk about him, is that he was cheap. He was going to stretch a dollar as far as he could.
As Monty Hillman said in one interview, he could not stand to lose money, is what it amounted to. And that could go into every area of production, right down to the catering even, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so he couldn't stand to lose money. at all. But I don't know that he had he had this system, so to speak. He had this way of making movies. And I don't think that he believed that movies should cost a whole lot, Jordan. And I think in a way that he was one of the folks that would embrace the idea that it is art under adversity. Adversity breeds art. Like if the challenge is what drives you to be creative. And if you can't do something for a couple $100,000, then 20, 30, 40 million is not going to make a better movie. In fact, I think Roger would argue that it makes a worse movie.
Yeah. Well, that's the weird thing. He said in one interview, you could rebuild a whole city with the amount they spend on a Hollywood movie. And he's right.
Yeah.
Or you could fix up a whole city. You could fix up an impoverished town for that amount.
And it's true.
He's right about that. Yeah, I agree.
So King of the B movies, he's called Schlockmeister. All these things,
which he didn't like. Apparently, he didn't like being called King of the Schlockmeister, King of the Bees. He didn't think of himself like that.
I think he would say that he would agree that maybe he was a maverick. Maybe he worked outside of the studio system.
Absolutely.
He didn't like to be told what to do. He wanted to do things his own way. It was when you were working for Roger, it was like the Roger Corman way or the highway.
Yeah. Or the Hollywood Boulevard way.
Hit the bricks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jordan, what is an exploitation film?
An exploitation film, that's a good question, Anthony. An exploitation film is something that's exploiting something in the headlines at the time. That's just one example.
Like something controversial.
Something controversial, recent. One might make either a biographical version of what is this shocking thing in the headlines at the time, or one might make a sort of Roman a cliff version where they change names to protect the innocent kind of thing. It could be that. It could also be exploitive of the time period. This is where teenagers are going and they're getting worse, and we have to make an exploitation movie about it. It's a kind of a bygone genre in a way.
Yeah.
But then again, here's the weird thing about exploitation as a genre. It creeps back up in other forms. But exploitation movies were always usually shown in the drive-ins, which was more in the South. Or if you were up north or in the East Coast area, the grindhouses is where you saw stuff like this.
Yeah.
Exploitation movies were exploiting topics of the time that were very controversial, essentially. Yeah. Yes.
Controversial taboos, moral taboos, sex, violence, drugs, things like that.
And also even people's sexual preferences, which was very exploitive at the time because people weren't out and proud like they are now. And it wasn't the same. It was a different time period.
Yeah. So Roger gets I guess he was an engineering student. Presumably he loved film or something growing up, but he didn't take to engineering and then started working in Hollywood. He grew up, I guess, kind of in Hollywood or spent his teen years there.
First as a messenger, apparently.
Yeah, messenger.
And then as a reader over at Fox, I think it was, a script reader, where you read scripts for the studio execs and you say, this sucks, you shouldn't make it into a movie. This is really good. But he disapproved almost every script, right? Until this movie, The Gunfighter, he read the script for and said, you should make this into a movie. And it became a movie with Gregory Peck, apparently, a big Western movie. Yeah,
and he didn't get credited for that and was pissed off about it. So I guess that's sort of what gave him the nudge to just think like, hey, I've been working in Hollywood. I've seen how these movies are made, working on sets, being drivers, script readers. I think he had worked in so many roles that he picked up quickly on how movies were made at a very basic level and said I could do that. So cobbled together some money, and Five Guns West, I think, was his first movie, and just did it. Just... You know, a young man, how old he was in his early 20s, just made a movie, just made it.
Yeah.
And it's not like today where you have just like, you can make a movie on your phone, or you can look up a YouTube video on how to make movies or anything like that. It was just like,
made it and got it out there, distributed. The most important part, most scary part as well. But
Yeah.
wait, was it this movie or was it Monster on the Ocean Floor? What was this?
Well, that's whenever, he gets together with a fledgling company called American Releasing Company, which would become American International Pictures.
Right.
Sam Arkoff and
James Nicholson.
James Nicholson. I almost said Jack Nicholson. James Nicholson.
No relation.
No relation.
Oddly, you would think.
But yeah.
That's what they tell us.
But anyway, I mean, and AIP on its own. AIP and Roger Corman become this like match made in heaven. These three dudes dominated drive-in movies, exploitation movies for the better part of probably 15 years, from the mid-50s to the late 60s.
Here was the weird thing, too, about his spending, though, on movies, was that he actually did say, even though he didn't like to spend a lot of money, he said, I notice how much you spend on how little you spend on getting these two double bill movies out, just so you can get a double bill out. Why not take that money and combine it into one movie? And that was different, actually, because then where a budget became at least $200,000 instead of, $100,000 or that kind of thing. But he did it just to double up the budget and make it a little bit grander of a movie, I guess.
Because it's like this, it's like these movies, even at the time, were like throwaway movies. They were B movies. Like usually you would have, I think back in the 30s and 40s, you would have, or 50s even, you'd have an A picture and a B picture. A picture was like your main...
The major studio movies.
Major studio movie, 10 Commandments, whatever. Well, maybe not that one, but a major Western or whatever it was. And then you have a B movie that was like the studio made a lesser movie. They just need to just get some people out to see it. And this is back in the day when people would spend 5 hours at the movie theater or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so Roger and AIP, I think it was really Roger's idea, is like, well, we know these movies are kind of crappy and sensationalistic, but if we spend less money on two movies, we package them together, and then we sell these as a double feature. Right. And we go to the drive-ins and we say, hey, we've got two movies for you for the price of one, so to speak, or whatever. And so the pressure was on to sort of very quickly and very cheaply make a bunch of movies a year. So I think he'd make 6 to almost 12 movies a year, shooting concurrently, using the same sets and trying to cut corners in every single way. Same crew, same actors, same sets. And we'll see that sort of continually. Like Roger's he creates this economy of shooting, this economy of producing, and just this assembly line of filmmaking.
And it's funny, Sam Arkoff would carry on that tradition even after Roger Corman went off and formed New World. It's like you saw Sam Arkoff when they kept AIP running. But you see him adopt those same techniques where he was reusing sets and stuff like that and keeping things cheap and all that.
But so an example of that is like in the 50s, you just have a bunch of the same actors, like Dick Miller. Yeah. Dick Miller, just as a kid.
Part of the Roger Corman stock company.
Oh, dude. Jonathan Hayes, Dick Miller,
And then a very young baby, Jack Nicholson, who was like in his early 30s at the time, I think, when he started with them.
Yeah. Jack Nicholson, certainly. I mean, it's just, I think, I was watching one interview, Jack Nicholson's like, Roger's the only person who hired me for like 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, he said he's the guy who kept him alive for 10 years just with work, at least, as an actor. Because the poor Jack Nicholson was not Jack Nicholson like he later was.
Yeah.
Hollywood didn't want him. They were just like, he looks weird, man. Maybe we'll put him on, maybe he'll work in TV. Or as Bruce Dern told this funny story where Nicholson was always optimistic about everything. And he was like, we can do anything, Dernsey. We can do anything. We're going to take over one day. And Bruce Dern was like, I'm lucky I just got to work on the wagon train carrying Lee Major's luggage, Jack. We all look weird here. We're lucky if we get hired anywhere.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. Because and that sort of begins, I guess, what was charitably credited to Roger is this guy who would give everyone their first chance. But I wanted to go back and say like Susan Cabot, Barbara Morris. When you're watching the first several years of Roger Corman's movies, it is the same people. It is the same everything.
Same stock company. Yeah.
And it's almost fun like that. Like, for example, the movie that really, and I mean, a lot of these movies, we're talking like teenager exploitation type movies. And then, of course, like monster movies. It Conquered the World.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Attack of the Crab Monsters. This is the kind of movie we're talking about, right?
Speaking of monster movies, I mean, he made Little Shop of Horrors. This is the original, folks, by the way, A Little Shop of Horrors. Not the musical, not the Broadway version. The original black and white.
Yeah.
But yeah, he made this in like 2 days. I mean, yeah, he rehearsed it 3 days before. But, I mean, talk about film school kids, pay attention. Kids wanting to make movies in really short time. I mean, 2 days he made that movie.
Using the same sets. I mean, obviously there's some production, there's some preparation, obviously. That, you know, there's some pre-production work. And once you got everything, you're shooting in 2 days. Boom, boom, boom.
You'd have to have meticulous planning to pull it off, of course, as well. Man. Let's not just say that it was that easy.
Oh, no. I think that's I think that's basically he created a template for movies, and he had a way of doing it. And I think it was a lot of do all this in pre-production, be ready to shoot. They weren't shooting 4 or 5 takes. You know, it was like 1 take, let's go. It's good enough.
Yeah. We're not doing another take unless the camera falls over.
Exactly. Good enough. And sometimes you catch some magic. You catch like Little Shop of Horrors, which was forever. It seemed like it was public domain the minute after it came out because it was on every DVD, VHS. I mean, it was like...
It was probably the second bill on every drive-in movie when you couldn't find, you know, I'm sure projectionists kept a print of Little Shop of Horrors in the back of the projection booth for like one of those movies that, you know, if you didn't have a movie booked on the second bill, here's the movie, you just stick on right here.
Yeah, and on those DVD like compilation packs or VHS double bills, there'd always be like Little Shop of Horrors on that. That's
how I discovered it, the VHS Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, and its sister movie, which was a movie I loved as a kid, Bucket of Blood. Jordan, have you seen that one?
I have not seen that one. That's with Dick Miller as well.
Yeah, Walter Paisley is born. It's like this,
and it's set like in the beat scene during the early '60s.
Yeah, it's in this coffee house beat scene, and it's a satire. It's a very great satire of that and a very good horror movie at the same time. And it's half the cast for Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, wow. You know? Jonathan Hayes, Dick Miller, and company. And
everybody's in it. Yeah, and it's great. And then, I don't know. So a lot of times I think he gets criticized for making these really cheesy, schlocky sort of movies. Mm-hmm. B movies, but I think sometimes you get, I mean, you know, A Broken Clock is right twice a day. Sometimes Roger Corman made a very good movie.
Yeah, as Jack Nicholson said in the interview on Corman's World, the great Corman's World documentary, free plug, which I watched before this podcast. He says, you know, occasionally, you know, accidentally Roger would make a good movie, you know. After all that after making all these other schlocky movies or whatever.
And Nicholson and he were just like, I mean, they must have been pretty tight. And I would give anything to just sit there and just listen to what Nicholson and Corman had to say to one another, you know, just hanging out.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, did they smoke weed together, like behind the panel sets of these Poe movies they're working on, like The Terror or whatever? I mean, I wonder. I have to wonder, man, where they had to. I mean, surely they got high together.
I don't know. I don't know if Roger, such a control freak, I don't know if that was his thing. I never heard of him really like drinking or doing anything like that. He seemed like a very measured person.
Wait till we start talking about the trip. I have notes on that.
No, until we talk about the trip. I mean, so this Maverick working outside of the studio system, not because I don't think the studios would give him the amount of control that he wanted to have on his movies. And I think Arkoff and Nicholson were just like, we don't care. Here, you know, here, make us 3 movies and we're just going to give you the money right back plus a percentage and you just keep at it, you know? Because that's like, I think what a lot of folks don't realize, and I don't know, I don't work in the movies, everybody, but when you make a movie, it's like going to the roulette table and winning. Oh,
Yeah,
man,
well,
we made
it's-
some money. Then
Yeah.
you walk over to the craps table and you put that same money down and hope you win again. You know what I mean?
Movies are essentially known in business as just a bad investment. And
Yeah.
that's honestly what they are 97% of the time, right? If you were to break
Yeah.
it down at a business standpoint, because you don't know exactly what you're saying. Exactly. I mean, just like what you're saying, you don't know, man. It is literally like the odds are so against you. From the moment you start rolling the camera, the odds are
Yeah.
against you.
Yeah, and you make a movie like Little Shop of Horrors for $20,000 or whatever it costs, $100,000, and it pays off, and you make a ton of money.
Yeah.
And then, like, Roger wants to make a real movie in the early '60s, 62, I think, 61. He wants to make a movie called The Intruder.
This was his message movie.
Yeah, so he's been making all these like movies like She Gods of Shark Reef, cutting together stuff like the Viking Women, whatever that Viking Women movie was.
Yeah.
All those teenager things, Fast and the Furious, one of the big first movies.
Fast and the Furious. Before Vin Diesel.
Yeah. But even Roger got paid on that title alone. So he was good. I bet that was a Nicholson. Nicholson was good with titles.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he makes The Intruder, and The Intruder is this movie about, and who's it star, Jordan? Have you ever seen this movie?
I've actually finally sat through this movie recently. It's hard to get through.
Yeah.
I still haven't got to the end, but it stars a very young, very baby William Shatner.
Yeah.
And it was also co-written by William F. Nolan and I think Charles Beaumont. These are sci-fi writers essentially. And William F. Nolan even plays one of the racists in the movie.
He plays this
because he was there as a writer on set. So
yeah, people might think this is definitely. If people thought it was problematic at the time, people would definitely think it's problematic now. But it is a very interesting movie.
But they shot this movie in the South with William Shatner. This is like William Shatner before Star Trek, mind you, even way before Star Trek.
And like they got in trouble, like seriously, they were filming in these small southern towns. I think it was in Missouri, and they were not telling the townsfolk what this movie was about. That it was like an anti-racism movie.
Yeah.
You've got William Shatner who plays this firebrand dude who comes to town where in this place where they're integrating the schools, and he wants to shut it down. And he's racist, and even in the town of racist, like he is super racist, and people are like, I'm racist, but that's really racist. You know what I mean? That's the gist of this interesting film.
Right down to he's wearing a damn white suit when he walks into town, like this Truman Capote looking white suit.
It is,
but it's whitey white, and it's like brighty white, and you're like, you can't get any more white than this guy.
No, it is an interesting film, but in real life, from what I recall, like Roger's autobiography was, or one of them, at least the one I know of, is How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. And from what I recall of that, he said that the townsfolk eventually found out the type of movie that they were making and what this was about.
It was very slow, I think, and gradual. Because they were smart to shoot it quietly most of the time. Right down to when there was this moment where William Shatner had to incite the crowd. He actually said, now this is different from what I hear from the Corman's version, Gene and Roger Corman, his brother, Gene. But he said when he had to incite the crowd in this one scene, he said all he did was say, how are the Mets going to be this year? Like that kind of thing. Or how do you think, who's your favorite team? How do you think they're going to do this year? It was just like that kind of simple thing. It wasn't actually anything.
That's interesting.
The cutaway stuff is where all the racist stuff is.
Wow.
But when they cut back to William Shatner facing the crowd, and you didn't see his you don't see his mouth moving, and William Shatner said that's all he did. He just simply said, "Who's your favorite baseball team?" kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and that makes a lot more sense. So basically, the locals were confronting them, like the production, the crew go to the hotel at night, and they were confronting them and harassing them. So they had to keep moving, I think, to a couple different towns. And interesting movie. See it, don't, whatever. It is what it is. But that movie did not make money. It did not, surprisingly, make money. Nobody wanted to see that film.
Apparently, too, his brother helped him finance the movie. AIP didn't want any part of it, and of course he was shocked. That was the first time AIP said no when he asked him for money.
Well, who was right? I mean, again,
AIP was like, "We're not getting in this controversy. We want to make money.
Yeah,
this is just controversy you're asking for here." And I think that's what the deal was, honestly.
I think Roger learned because he I think at a point he's like, I'm making all these teenage movies and all these cheesy sci-fi movies. Let me make a real movie. Am I a real filmmaker? Let me make a real movie. And then I think he learned, I don't know if he learned the right lesson, but he learned people don't want to see that. So then he continues, he doubles down on what he was doing before. He's like, I'm just going to make movies that people want to see. Good, bad, whatever. I don't care, and just doubling down and making some money. And then if we can slip in a message subtly here and some subtext, we'll do that, but otherwise, whatever. And he goes on and begins to make a very important for his career series of movies, the Poe movies, Jordan. And tell us about the Poe movies.
Oh my God, you have the Pit and the Pendulum. I'm going probably in the wrong order. The Fall of the House of Usher. I think the Tomb of Ligeia, the Haunted Palace. I think is that another one
based on the Mask of Red Death.
Mask of Red Death. Although he produced that one, I think that was Nick Rogue. Early Nick Rogue directed, but he had all these great sets that he was reusing for all these movies. Essentially, all these set panels that he had rented for a good while. Maybe who knows? Maybe AIP already owned these set panels, and he was just using them, and he would do this practice again later on when he was running his own company, New World, obviously. But it was a wise way of doing it. And then even right down to, even after making The Raven, he says, let's make one little more movie called The Terror, and let's just rush through it and use what sets we have left over from all these Poe movies.
And the terror is terrible. Yeah.
And the terror is not, nobody can, even Jack Nicholson said, nobody can tell you what this movie's about,
Yeah. I mean, it's not in a fun acid trip way and like, what is going on? But he got Vincent Price for most of these. Boris Karloff.
Most of these except for the terror. He had a few more days of Boris Karloff for the terror. So that's why he got him for that movie. And I think that was also another factor was we've got these few sets and we've got a few days of Boris Karloff. So let's do the best. Let's make, and we have more ends of film. Let's make another movie. Bam.
And flashing forward, what other movie incorporated a few more days of Boris Karloff and the movie The Terror?
Okay, this movie I'm glad you brought up because this movie scares the fuck out of me still when I watch it. It's called Targets. From 1968.
Jumping ahead, but wow,
yeah.
That's one of the good ones. Bogdanovich.
Peter Bogdanovich's directorial debut. And this is because him and his wife, Polly Platt, well, he's already working under Corman because he worked as a first unit guy on Wild in the Streets. Not just first unit, right down to like getting laundry and food for the company. Apparently. Yeah. But finally, Corman offers him Targets. He says, I have 3 days of Boris Karloff left, and I've got footage of the terror. Get together 20 minutes of that and make a movie on top of that, write a movie on top of that. And it was Bogdanovich's wife, Polly Platt, who became a producer later on, a big producer later on movies like Bottle Rocket. And she said when they were watching it, why aren't these movies scary anymore? Watching the terror and how bad it was. Yeah. And that was what gave them the impetus for Karloff's character in the movie, who's playing an aging horror film character, saying, why aren't these entertaining anymore? And the movie, it coincides with this scary movie about this kid that goes to a LA water tower on the side of an LA freeway in Los Angeles and just starts shooting at everybody.
Yeah, before school shootings or anything or public mass shootings. It's crazy.
But it was based on the shooting in Austin, Texas with Charles Whitman in the early 60s.
Yeah.
So it has all that frightening stuff. That is the horror in the movie. That's the interesting thing in this movie, Targets. That is the real horror in this movie, is you see this happening, juxtaposed with this aging horror actor. It's very bizarre, but man, what a movie. It's a very powerful film still when you watch it.
Check it out.
This movie never had a chance, though, because it was released right after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated publicly. So, of course, nobody wanted to go see this movie after that happened, sadly.
And meanwhile, like, the Poe movies are big. They're making a lot of money. He's cranking them out. Okay, let's talk about the Wild Angels.
They're wild. They're free. But they're no angels.
So Roger Corman makes the first biker movie, and in true Roger fashion, and you get all these stories from Roger, like, so I just went down to hang out with the Hells Angels, and I stayed in their clubhouse, and you know what I mean?
Which I don't believe I don't believe a second of. I don't know how he survived that.
Yeah. But what comes out of it, the Wild Angels, is, I guess, was a huge hit. Was a huge hit for AIP and Roger.
I know, I got to throw in, Peter Fonda said in an interview, Roger Corman approached him and said, I want to make a movie about the Hells Angels without making a statement. And Peter Fonda's response was like, making a movie about the Hells Angels is making a statement, dude. What? Okay, fine. Let's do this movie.
On a budget of $360,000. So that's your average Roger Corman kind of, budget, which was
much as a Poe film,
a third of what a movie cost back then. You know what I mean? Made $15.54 million asterisk on those numbers.
Hello.
So, yes, that got everybody's attention. So this Roger Corman, who was making some good money on these, like The Raven cost $350,000, made $1.4 million. But then like Wild Angels comes out, and they had their finger on the pulse of what was young and happening and groovy, man. Like, because it's like,
young people want to see movies that are dangerous and edgy always, no matter what generation it is. Even nowadays, right? I think teenagers definitely want to see something dangerous above them. They want to see kids that are worse than them on screen.
And the Wild Angels is not like very, you watch it now and it really seems like just a real soft biker film.
It's not Hell's Angels like what you would see even in the documentary later on by the Stones documentary, Give Me Shelter, where you actually see the Hells Angels beating the shit out of people.
Yeah.
It's tame compared to that even, definitely,
I think that Marlon Brando and like
the Wild Ones?
Lee Marvin and everyone from the Wild One could beat up this band. No, I think the Little Rascals could beat them up. I think that they're not tough. Peter Fonda is not a tough dude.
No, they just want to be free to get loaded, man.
We just want to get loaded, man. And so anyway,
but Peter Fonda did ride though. He did ride a bike though, apparently.
Yeah, and apparently, like, I guess they hired the Hells Angels and they were cool-ish. I don't recall any huge stories coming out of that other than Roger like hanging out with the Hells Angels, which is a big thing. But then, if they like the Wild Angels and they like biker movies, that started the whole biker movie thing that went on for another 10 years. Mm-hmm. What about drugs, Jordan? So Roger has an awakening, essentially. What happens with his next big movie?
Are you talking about The Trip? From 1967, it comes out, the year of the Summer of Love. But yeah, this movie, The Trip, is a movie all because I think it was Roger Corman wanted to make a movie about LSD. So they got Jack Nicholson to write the script, and they thought they knew Jack Nicholson was going to be a good writer on the side, apparently. And this was the first time, apparently, Jack finally got paid really well to write the script, even. As Jack Nicholson said in an interview on this documentary, Corman's World, he was like, "That's the first time I said, can I get a check, Roger?" or something. I don't know, something like that. It was like, that's my old man, Jack Nicholson. Sorry. So yeah,
Jordan, you can do better than that.
He was like, Roger, I've been working here a long time. Would it hurt to pay me a little more, maybe get a raise on this movie with the script for the trip? I mean, if I'm going to type this out, I'm going to be smoking a lot of marijuana here, Roger. And, I'm going to have to drop some acid. And anyway, yeah. So
that movie is like a stock company.
And you say Roger had an awakening. Roger Corman decides to drop acid while making this movie. And he has
to do the
his
research.
Assistant, yes, to do research. And he even has his assistant, Francis Dole, his secretary, nearby to dictate. I don't know how that was going to go down, how he thought that was going to go down. Because if anybody, I've tripped on acid before. I've tripped on mushrooms. I'll admit it here on the podcast,
Jordan.
folks. Yes, we've all rode the unicorn, Anthony, at one point, or the UFO.
Is that what they call it, riding the unicorn?
No, I just made that up just now.
You smoke the devil weed, marijuana, and you ride the unicorn. We have it.
Oh, come on, Anthony. We've all rode the unicorn, Anthony.
We've all rode the unicorn.
We've all rode the UFO, Anthony. We've all looked up the eyes of Zardoz, okay? No, I'm just making shit up here.
So he tripped and
but yeah, they all him and Petey, as Nicholson would say, and Hoppy. I think they all went out to somewhere and tripped with and Corman's there, and yeah, and Corman. I know Corman loved the trip, from what I understand. He loved the acid trip itself. I think he thought it was kind of a bummer coming down from it. Even I remember reading this in a different book about his movies. I can't remember what it was called. My dad had this book, and I remember reading specifically about this movie. I was obsessed with this movie as a teenager, The Trip, and it was way before I was even made or conceived. This movie came out, but yeah, I found that interesting that he did enjoy his trip, but at the end of it, he didn't like coming down. And he kind of felt like, oh my God, this is it. Oh my God.
He kind of had a very positive experience with LSD. So
yeah,
when you're making a movie about LSD, even Arkoff and Nicholson, they made a lot of crazy controversial movies, right? They were making all this stuff too.
They would make Wild in the Streets a year later, I think, or even the same year as this movie. Even though these guys were... Arkoff and Nicholson, James Nicholson, were conservatives very much, obviously. They were there to make money at the same time, I think. But they were like, we don't want this to be a pro-LSD movie. What the fuck?
We can't, because it won't be shown. The distributors don't want it. It's
Yeah.
That's why Wild in the Streets is a cautionary tale, right? If you remember, it's about, and listen to our episode about that. Wild in the Streets is about a guy who becomes president by dosing the Washington, D.C. water supply with acid. Watch the movie. Listen to our review. Long story.
But there was, you bring that up, it's interesting. There was a split on how they were going to distribute that movie.
Yes.
Between Arkoff, and in fact, that created the most tension between their relationship after that. Because they were split on how to distribute it. One of them, Arkoff, was like, I believe this could really happen to the youth of America. Nicholson was like, no, I disagree. This movie is just a science fiction movie. That's all it is, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like...
I think The Trip and Wild in the Street, something was happening. The 60s were splitting all these men apart. Because right around that time, Arkoff and Nicholson didn't last much longer after that.
Yeah.
I think it was The Trip that really soured the relationship with Roger because of that. Because from what I understand, I'm piecing this together, but
interesting. I never thought about that part. Yeah.
He made The Trip. Yeah, this is what I think is he made The Trip and had a very positive experience on LSD. And when you watch The Trip, there's not really a negative connotation. It's weird, but it's not like Peter. He doesn't die at the end. Peter Fonda doesn't. Spoiler alert: he doesn't die.
It still kind of ends on a positive note, I will say. Yeah. Even with the cracked glass that the studio added at the end of it, that Arkoff and Nicholson added as a cautionary thing.
If nothing else,
this weird cracked glass thing that happens at the end after he says, "I think that I love you."
And
I remember that
final frame of the movie. That's all they did. I don't think they really messed with the edit itself, but that pissed Roger off. Don't touch my movie. They'd never really done that before.
Yeah.
They touched his movie. They changed what his movie was about.
They meddled with the ending. Hell, that is meddling with the ending kind of as a studio.
And that pissed him off. And then that was like, I think that sowed the seeds of like, look, I'm tired of working for other people. And you know, that's why Roger couldn't work for a major. He did work some with major studios, but
no, he'd rather run the studio every time.
Exactly. So why is he giving a lot of this money? I mean, who's making the money here but Arkoff and Nicholson, right?
Yeah. Roger Corman probably feels like I'm cranking them out here for them. I'm baking all these cakes for them, and yet they get more of the profit, you know.
I think The Trip was a big turning point.
Well, you think up until the mid-'70s when he's going to start New World, do you think this is like a major turning point where he's a shift kind of?
A shift happened, I think, for him. And that's when... And so he still makes Bloody Mama. There's a bunch of Mama movies which are like, after the success of Bonnie and Clyde, these 1930s gangstery kind of movies. All you need is an old car, a gun, and like Shelley Winters or Angie Dickinson, and then you got a movie, right?
Yeah, and he's got even Boxcar Bertha, directed by a very young Scorsese, and this is like Scorsese's third movie.
Yeah.
I think.
Now's probably a good time to talk about like Jordan. So Roger Corman, like, you know, when you hear Roger Corman's name, you think of, hey, he's cheap, whatever. You think of man who kind of did it all himself. But let me ask you this. Roger Corman got a lot of notable people their start, right?
Yes.
A who's who. Basically, if you're talking about like Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, that documentary and documentaries like that talk about the American New Wave in the 60s and 70s, mostly the 70s.
And they acknowledge him in that movie as well. I mean,
they have to, right?
Because that's where people get their start as a director, because Roger Corman gives these people their shot early on, like Bogdanovich and Francis Ford Coppola, who we forgot to mention, who shot parts of The Terror that we mentioned earlier, and reshot stuff for this. For Battle Beyond the Sun, this Russian sci-fi movie Roger acquired.
Cut that up.
Or AIP acquired, I guess, you know, where they had to add scenes.
And then Dementia 13 was his first, like, hey, go direct this thing. And that's what Roger would do. He would, Roger like I know him, that's what Corman would do. Is I think he was, one of his gifts is like spotting talent in people.
Definitely.
Like Joe Dante, right? Worked with him for a long time, and Joe Dante was like some guy, and he's like, "Hey, and just
we're skipping ahead to New World at that point, but yeah, I mean, Joe Dante, man, he starts off. My God, what a dream job! I wish I could have started my career as a young man like Joe Dante did.
Yeah,
or Alan Arkush did.
Alan Arkush, the list goes on.
His partner also, who later became a director of TV and film. But yeah, like, man, they started in the editing department, editing trailers. I mean, how much fun would that be? That just, you know.
Yeah. Scorsese got started on Boxcar Bertha, Monty Hellman, Paul Bartel.
On Death Race 2000, which I just watched most of last night again, because I was in the Roger Corman mode before this podcast, so...
Yeah, and Peter Bogdanovich, we talked about Targets. You know, I think Roger produced Targets.
Jonathan Demme, Jonathan Kaplan, the two Jonathans.
Ron Howard.
Jesus Christ. He makes this movie with Roger where he says, let me be the star and the director. So, because I want to direct a movie. And Corman's like, fine, you know, name value, bam. Opie writing and directing this movie. Oh, I'm sorry, I said Opie. Sorry, Ron Howard.
Oh,
You're the nicest director in Hollywood, Ron Howard. I will say that. Everybody should be like Ron Howard as a director, in my opinion, by the way. Anyway.
John Sayles.
I
mean, Jack Hill. He worked with Jack Hill, who's another exploitation sort of
Jack Hill. Later on with New World, with the Big Bird Cage, notably.
And those are just directors. And then you're like...
Pam Grier movies.
The actors, like...
And of course, Pam Grier, like I just said, you know, I mean, Pam Grier being one of the actors that come out of a Corman school. De Niro. David Carradine. David Carradine, who also said that Roger kept his stomach full, you know, kept him eating, you know.
Well, I mean, yeah, because he would just hire, you know, he keep hiring these people. But I mean, spotting talent, just saying, hey, you make a film, apparently had this way of just sitting people down for an hour at lunch and telling them how to make a movie. You need to do this, and then get a person to do this, and then don't do this, don't shoot like this, and just gave them the rundown on how to shoot a movie. The Roger
He
Corman
gave him a
way.
film school in a way, because he would tell you these. He gave you these like perfect guidelines that were like guidelines for a blockbuster almost. Like, you know, make the first few minutes interesting to keep the audience involved. Have the promise of nudity in the first 15 minutes or so. The promise of nudity or maybe possibly sex, but you don't even have to go there, honestly. It just keeps the audience interested in the movie. The middles don't matter because that's where they're going to go get popcorn.
Doesn't matter. Everyone's making out. The first kill should be bloody.
Yeah, the first kill should be bloody. You know, whatever kills after are not as significant as what's going to be the first kill and the last kill. And I mean, and then the middle is just filler, you know, mostly.
Exactly. And people aren't paying attention to that. I mean, that's the thing. Give the people what they want. And here's a formula that worked. Now, some would argue that, you know, big movies with good plots and good actors do make money.
Yeah.
But
Martin Scorsese said he told him that same thing on Boxcar Bertha. And he said, I never heard it broken down so easily and perfectly that way. And he said, you know, later on when he saw the storyboards he had done, he was like, Corman was like, did you do this for every scene in the movie? And Scorsese was like, well, yeah, you know, I like the storyboard. And he was like, okay, well, I'll see you later. Nice talking to you again. Bye.
Yeah. And at this time, I think it's important. We're in the late 60s. We've been hopping around here a little bit. But I think he passed on the opportunity to produce movies like Mean Streets because, you know, he didn't want to shell out the money that it was going to take. You know what I mean? If it wasn't $100,000 or $200,000,
well, I heard Mean Streets he said he wanted it to be a blaxploitation movie. Yeah. And Scorsese was like, no, the way I wrote it, it's what I know. It's Italian American flavor. It's a different flavor. It can't be switched around that easily. You know, I wonder now, looking at Mean Streets, if you just reverse the cast, like what it would look like now. You know,
Roger Corman's Mean Streets.
Yeah, I wonder what Roger Corman's Mean Streets would look like. Would we have like Yap Picado in there and shit, and like half the cast of Superfly and Ron O'Neill and
Ron O'Neill in there,
just every black and Pam Grier in there? You know?
Oh wow.
I mean, what would that look like? I wonder what that would look like now.
Yeah, Fred Williamson's in there.
And then Scorsese directing it? Oh, my God. That would be like...
Well, yeah. So another movie that he lost the opportunity to produce because he wouldn't put forth the money was Easy Rider. And I think that burned him up because what happened is apparently... Hopper and Fonda, who were just working with, they were like AIP stock company people there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They took Easy Rider to AIP. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to shell out that kind of money, like $500,000 for this movie, whatever it was. Roger, you know, I'll give you $150,000 to do it. And they said no. And they went over.
It wasn't Roger Corman all the way on that, apparently, though. Apparently, Roger, you have to remember, Roger was still with AIP at that time.
Yeah.
And he had a good relationship with them, but they still had to answer to Arkoff and Nicholson. And they were looking at Dennis Hopper, and they were like, if you fuck this up, if you screw this up at any time, we're going to have the right to fire you and replace you.
Well, they didn't trust crazy old Dennis Hopper, understandably. But no, he directed before. That wasn't that was his first movie.
He directed on The Trip.
Yeah. But he worked on The Trip, certainly directed on that. And I think Roger was coming to bat for him, so to speak.
Yeah. But Roger even was like, if you guys walk, I understand. But he wanted them to. I think that probably was another burn, though. You're right. Because, I mean, for why he would start New World later on.
Exactly. Because
like one more fucking burn one more cigarette burn, one more one more blade to the wrist. Roger was sitting there with a blade to his wrist every time. Yeah. AIP was fucking with him. No, I'm just
one more attack of that crab monster, AIP.
He made one cut on his wrist after Easy Rider, he made another cut on his wrist before that, on the trip.
It was like, death by 1,000 cuts. And Roger, I think at this point, because let me tell you why. Roger hates to lose money. And like you said, and
they did miss out on Easy Rider money. You're right.
Yeah, Roger talking about this movie. I saw him in an interview out of the same one you watched, but just he talking about this, you could just tell there's this twinge of regret and a little anger because these were his proteges, so to speak. I didn't exclusively work with Corman, but he'd worked with these guys before, right?
Yeah, you're right. They were like his students, his pupils, kind of.
And Easy Rider went to Columbia because Columbia was willing to shell out $350,000, $400,000 for this movie.
Yeah, thanks to Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson, having faith in it. But those guys were taking risks on every kind of movie. They were taking risks
back then. A little different story there, but yeah.
Yeah, whole different story there.
Yeah. But Easy Rider on that budget of $350 to $400 made $60 million. Had Roger Corman shelled out an extra $100,000, you know what I mean? He could have made, and you could just tell, like, oh man, that one hurt. And that's.
Oh, you mean he could have shelled out $100,000 of his own money and owned like 50% of that movie.
Yeah,
and he would have pocketed a lot more money than Petey and Hoppy did later on.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. Like that, I think is the final nail in the coffin with Roger and AIP. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff going on. So then he forms his own company, New World Pictures, Jordan. And tell us about New World Pictures. What do they do?
New World Pictures. Oh, man. Well, they start off small, doing like movies like, what is it? Macon County, Sunshine, Moonshine. I don't know. I'm getting all my titles mixed up now. They do Death Race 2000, which I watched a good chunk of last night.
Yeah. So New World does, I would say it's just deep into, there's two worlds of New Worlds, I guess, so to speak. Like there's the exploitation, that's sex romps. They do a lot of women in cages, nurse.
They do
movies.
a lot. More women in prison movies.
Cheerleader movies, anything where it's like the blank nurses, the blank cheerleaders, women, and anything that they could. But the other vein of what New World is doing at this time in the 70s is they're distributing a lot of foreign films. And Roger, I think this was more in line with Roger's own actual taste. I think he was sort of personally a film snob. He liked highbrow movies.
He was releasing Ingmar Bergman movies because he loved Ingmar Bergman movies. I mean, stuff like that.
Fellini
movies, even like
won an Academy Award. Kurosawa movie, written movie. Truffaut, I know a couple Truffaut movies and later Truffaut movies. But he brings some of these like foreign films into the States that are actually like good movies. And
even a movie that we talked about, Star Crash, which technically came out of Italy. And he took that movie even in the late 70s. But
Fantastic Planet too.
I love Fantastic Planet. This movie from France, this weird animated movie.
Harder They Come, a cool Jamaican movie. And sorry, what are you about to say?
I was going to say back up. Talk about the man Roger Corman. He does come off very scholarly, and even in interviews, everybody says how he sounds like a college professor when he talks, and even people around him say like you would never know he was a filmmaker or director when you talk to him because he sounds well read, very scholarly, very intelligent, and this says a lot about him just releasing these foreign films in general. This just says that he doesn't watch like the kind of movies he makes, obviously.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing too, is he doesn't watch any of this stuff, but
I mean, he's giving the people what they want to a fault. But
he actually has a taste in highbrow foreign films. What we call in America art films. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's all I'll go on about that.
But no, you're right. I mean, I think that's sort of the thing. And again, instead of making an intruder type movie in the 70s, and he directed a handful of movies at this time still, but he definitely wanted to maybe not appear as just a schlocky movie company. He wanted some street cred to his movie cred to this New World Pictures. We're not just doing blaxploitation. We're not just doing a movie called candy stripe nurses,
Yeah.
summer school teachers, cage.
We're not just doing this movie called Jackson County Jail or whatever with Yvette Mimieux getting raped and, Tommy Lee Jones, before he's even known as Tommy Lee Jones, trying to save the day. No, we want to be known for highbrow Ingmar Bergman, Seventh Seal kind of stuff, Fellini kind of stuff.
Yeah, Fellini. We don't want to be known as the fucking studio that released Dirty Duck, which is a horrible Fritz the Cat ripoff. Terrible.
We
terrible
tried
movie.
to get Kurosawa's last movie, but Lucas and Coppola beat us to it once again. I'm sorry. Anyway,
But in this, so there's a couple movies I just want to talk about from the New World canon, like the early 70s, right?
Okay, yeah, when New World is new, no pun intended.
Yeah. Bury Me an Angel. I think I've talked about that movie before. I don't know why. But that's sort of one of the genre of lady biker movies, and Dark Town Strutters, which is like movies about lady biker gangs, which are interesting.
Oh, Bury Me an Angel had Marion Faithfull in it? Or no?
Dixie Peabody, I think.
Oh, okay, I'm getting my movies mixed up. Never mind, sorry.
Yeah, but Barbara Peters directed that. Speaking of giving folks a chance, so to speak. Humanoids from the Deep. She directed that one, guys. We talked about that. That was a New World release later on. But,
oh, yes.
But I'm a big War Notes fan, so they released The Cockfighter at this time, which I think in his book he said was one of the movies he lost money on.
That was a Monty Hellman movie?
A Monty Hellman directed movie, because who wants to see a movie about cockfighting? Which is true.
Actual cockfighting with chickens and all that shit.
Yeah. It is problematic for many reasons. It was problematic then even.
Roger was like, are there going to be men naked in this movie? No? Okay, well, because...
Let's have some boobs.
All right, Monty. Will there be boobs at least? Okay. This will be the movie I lose money on, I'm pretty sure. Okay. I'll write it as a tax write-off.
Yeah. War Notes is in that. It's great. But yeah, it's a lot of really cheesy movies in this era. And I don't know if the epitome of New World was, but in spirit, the epitome is Death Race 2000, Jordan. And for those people who have not seen Death Race 2000, this opus...
To me, that is New World.
What is it about? What is it about? What is Death Race 2000?
I mean, this movie came before Mad Max, and I feel like it influenced Mad Max a little bit, maybe. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially a simple satire where you have a bunch of race car drivers. I mean, it might look like NASCAR to people now watching it, like a fucked up NASCAR where you have to kill people. But yeah, it's a futuristic dystopian movie where people drive cars in this race to kill people who are like happen to be on the road nearby, or people that want to be killed because it gives them points in the game and the score. And it's a big, large game, essentially, this Death Race 2000. And it stars David Carradine as Frankenstein, the star race car driver. It stars a baby, talk about giving chances again, a baby Sylvester Stallone who hasn't done anything at this point except for softcore movies. And except for one softcore movie, maybe in another movie or so. But anyway,
hey Jordan, you'll do a lot when you're hungry and you ain't got no shoes, Hey,
is that you, Stallone? No,
that's
we
the worst
gotta do like
Stallone
Vin Diesel and Stallone.
I know.
I admire your work. I admire your work. No, but yeah, and he stars as the guy who's a competitor against David Carradine's Frankenstein. He's Machine Joe Gunn, I think is his name. And he does a lot of this. He yells a lot in the movie, and he shoots a machine gun at one point. He goes, ah! Before Rambo even. And and it's got Mary Warnoff in another race car even. Mary Warnoff, who would later work with Paul Bartel again on a couple of movies, including Eating Raoul.
And those two. We should have a whole episode on just those two in the few movies.
Really?
They gave us. But no, Hollywood Boulevard, that's kind of a big movie this time, and that's like Alan Arkush.
Oh, that's Alan Arkush and Joe Dante. After they were in the editing room so long cutting trailers and concocting these they weren't just cutting the trailers. Apparently they were like coming up with the ad ideas for these trailers. Yeah. They were inventing these whole trailers.
Yeah, that is the thing. I think Roger was like, do it. Like, yeah, we're not going to hire another position for that. You guys do it. You're cutting the trailers. You might as well think of
He didn't check them. I don't even think he checked them after a while and was like, that trailer is not going to go out that way. I don't, they were talking about how they like threw in footage that wasn't even the movie sometimes just to help sell the boring ass movie.
I mean, just fly by night. And that's, God,
they said on one trailer they added footage of like a factory with white powder, and they said in the trailer that they're deporting white China from this factory. They just added shit like that in some mediocre trailer at one point. I don't remember which one it was, but it just shows you. I mean, and they were editing trailers there together until 1978, but they would come up with the voiceover and shit even apparently sometimes. I think they had a lot of power over the trailers here.
I have a feeling they did it all. Roger's just like that. Roger was real good or bad, I don't know about that. Like, hey, you just do this. And I think in a weird way what I kept hearing in the interviews and the documentaries I saw was that empowered was the word that would come up. Like, people would say, I was just kind of doing this job at a studio. And then Roger was like, hey, why don't you direct a film? Or why don't you, do this role or that role, write this thing or whatever you're going to do. And people were like, and I did it. And he trusted me to do that, and didn't question it, and just, and imagine if Roger Corman was just like, Jordan, I want you to direct a film. Here's how you direct a film. Show up on Tuesday. And then Roger's not there. And then you're like, oh crap, I have to direct this movie. And I have 2 weeks to do this.
See, now in my fantasy, I just want to be back in that time period with Roger Corman, telling me to do all that.
Yeah.
I want, if I would pick a job back in that time period, it would be, once again, Joe Dante and Alan Arkush's job in the trailer room
sitting in the trailer room
at New World. Oh my God, that would be my dream job. And to sell these like movies. Oh my God. Can I go back in time, please? And just like sit there at the Moviola. I'll learn how to run a Moviola and,
You got to sell like Moonshine County Express or Great Texas Dynamite Chase or one of these things.
I just, and their trailers, you can look at their trailers they cut from those movies and they're just done with love, man. They're little mini movies themselves. You can tell, you can see talent in Joe Dante and Alan Arkush's cut trailers for New World back then, folks, honestly.
And, so then, speaking of Joe Dante, going back to Jaws, Jordan.
They're essentially doing the same shtick you see by other studios at that time in the 70s until this little movie from Universal comes along called Jaws and changes up the whole game. And this makes Roger realize that, like, as he says, the studios are on to what I've been doing all these years.
Yeah.
As he said in an interview, even. Big time.
Exploitation movie.
He's got to find a way to now top what the studios do after this forever. And then after a little movie called Star Wars, even the same thing. So he's got to, later on, he's got to find a way to top all these movies. And that's the way New World goes from this point. I just say New World kind of makes a shift after Jaws kind of.
You're right. They go from being trendsetters, so to speak, or really jumping in the pool and capitalizing on what a lot of other people are doing, but low budget, blaxploitation, biker films, horror, weird stuff like God Told Me To.
Hollywood makes a shift too, even. I mean, kind of at the same time. I mean, MGM is trying to do science fiction at this point, big budget science fiction, not like Star Wars either. It's more anyway. But
what movie comes out in 1978, which is like probably one of New World's like biggest hits, and is actually maybe in the good movie pile?
Are we talking about Piranha?
We're talking about Piranha, yes.
Piranha. Dun, dun. Oh, sorry. Piranha, directed by Joe Dante, written by John Sayles. Friggin' John Sayles, who wrote Apollo 13, people.
Yeah.
Wrote Battle Beyond the Stars later on, which we'll get into, I'm sure, but,
Directed Brother from Another Planet.
Yeah, on his own. Yeah, that was like his second movie he directed by himself, out on his own.
That's an interesting movie.
Starring Joe Orton from Terminator 2, and what goes on.
I've always liked Lone Star, too. Yeah, anyway.
Oh, Lone Star was an interesting movie.
Yeah, we should talk about that sometime. But anyway, Piranha ends up being a huge hit. It's like, it's the rare time in which like a rip-off movie, and I don't think I'm alone in saying this, it's campy, it's cheesy, but Piranha is just one fin below Jaws. I think for many people who like the killer fish genre.
That's a great pun. Did you come up with that? Oh my God, the fin below, one fin above. I love that.
Roger's like, Anthony, I want you to come up with a pun to describe piranha.
This is Roger's ghost over our podcast.
So $600,000 to $700,000. This thing made $16 million. So Piranha was a huge hit and cemented.
This was their Jaws New World, but I mean Spielberg even called this the best Jaws ripoff he had ever seen amongst, and there were many bad Jaws ripoffs around that time period. Piranha is like, in its quality, it's a Jaws movie. It's like it's as good as Jaws, almost, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's
fun. It's a different feeling. But certainly
it's original compared to Jaws. Yeah, it's an original Jaws, completely original Jaws. Even though they were ripping off Jaws, it's an original ripoff of Jaws. It's an original Jaws. I've said it many a times now.
Say original Jaws again.
Everybody drink out there every time I say that. Original Jaws. Anyway.
So Piranha.
But also this gets Spielberg interested to hire Joe Dante to do a movie later on.
What movie was that, Jordan?
I mean, this is why we got Gremlins later on, is for starters.
Gremlins is very similar to Jaws, yeah.
Started the Joe Dante Spielberg relationship, and I mean, they did another movie even after that, Inner Space. So, I mean, obviously it was because of Piranha. We have to give credit.
Yeah, definitely. And later on, he does Up From the Depths, which is another Jaws ripoff, but not good. Not Piranha.
Joe Dante? Oh, Roger Corman.
No. New World does, yeah.
New World does. Oh, my bad, sorry.
But at this time also, like you mentioned, Star Crash. And that's to capitalize on Star Wars, right?
Star Crash, which is this movie that comes out of Italy, made by Louis Coates, starring Marjo Gortner, who we've talked about before on two other podcasts with Jeannie and John, and the Star Crash review that we did. And then, Caroline Munro is the star of this movie, but it comes out of Italy, and it's like the languages is probably all over the place when they buy this movie, I imagine.
Yeah, they tried to make some sense of it.
So they tighten it up. They got John Barry to do the soundtrack, which had this Star Wars kind of soundtrack to it. And sadly, I mean, Louis Coates, the director, he thought he was making a Harryhausen film, but the distributors were like, and Roger Corman was like, no, this is a Star Wars movie. I mean, come on. Yeah. And then this was like the last trailer, apparently, that Joe Dante ever edited for New World before he went off to direct Piranha, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a big movie. And then we have Battle Beyond the Stars come a year later. This is a movie where they spend money. New World spends like $5 million. And this is more money than Roger's probably used to spending, I think, honestly, is what he spends on Battle Beyond the Stars.
Well, he paid it forward because the sets from Battle from Beyond the Stars were reused.
True.
And I think we talked about this in Galaxy of Terror, another movie that comes out.
But we meet a young James Cameron and a young Gale Anne Hurd on Battle Beyond the Stars, and he empowers them. You talk about empowering.
Yeah.
He hires Gale Anne Hurd, and she even said in an interview later on, she realized that Roger didn't think about sex, but he also realized that women were cheaper to hire.
Yeah.
She said that in an interview. I thought I heard her the right way when she said that.
Patriarchy. Yeah, I bet.
But true. I mean, he didn't think about sex. On his cruise, there was equal amount of women and men working together. Not like a lot of Hollywood crews where a lot of men, young and old, working on it, just young and old men. Not the same dynamic, but...
he'd hire Penelope Spheris. I mean, he hired female directors, not the same.
He hired
ratio,
females to direct. He didn't give a fuck about it. He didn't think about, you know. He's thinking about also they're just young and cheap to hire once again.
But I think another movie I want to talk about.
No, I shouldn't say that, but yeah.
Sort of at this time, late 70s, is Saint Jack. That's a Peter Bogdanovich movie.
Yeah.
And I like that movie. It's long, it's plotting.
You told me to watch that movie, and I did. I watched that movie a few years ago. Actually, it was a good movie. It was like an art house movie, full of moments and everything. It was like, yeah.
It's about a guy who kind of runs a brothel in Singapore, the great Ben Gazzara, who we talked about like on Roadhouse. But an interesting movie.
Is there any blood in this movie, Anthony? Is there any killing? Is this a New World film?
No, he runs afoul of some gangsters. It's just an interesting movie. Probably could have been trimmed down about 20 minutes, but a very deliberate film. And I don't necessarily like Bogdanovich as a person. He's problematic, but
he's an actor in the movie as well, as I remember.
Yeah, but I mean that's one of the good ones. That's one a movie I really like from that era, that late 70s New World era. And also they did another movie which we briefly talked about, Jordan, called Night of the Cobra Jade. Comes out in 1979.
Oh, that's right. Starring Yul Brynner and Mac Davis and
Marjoe Gortner,
Jim Kelly. My God, it had a big cast. This movie, this heist movie.
And like a lot of other movies, filmed like going back to the old women in prison movies, filmed in the Philippines, where you can blow things up. where extras are cheap. And then another movie we talked about, 1980, Humanoids from the Deep. We talk about a lot of New World Pictures movies, it turns out.
Man, we do. Oh, Humanoids from the Deep. We did review that movie. Man, that movie. Now, that movie is where, I already brought up Corman's power on that review.
Yeah.
The man just died. I'll be nice on this one right here. I was just like, man, he just really enforced his will on these weird scenes. Anyway.
I mean, I guess I'm not going to defend like all the weirdness.
These exploitive scenes, I'm saying it'd be nice.
But yeah, that was sort of the time. And Fitzcarraldo, great movie. Bringing in movies. It's like you get a Galaxy of Terror and then you got Fitzcarraldo. It's just like.
Humanoids of the Deep had a woman director. I mean, once again, he was empowering people. I heard, Battle Beyond the Stars the same year, once again, starring Richard Thomas and Darlene Flugel from To Live and Die in L.A., another movie we talked about in a podcast, and George Peppard, and just this big cast, and also Robert Vaughn. It's like the Magnificent Seven and Sybil Danning. And I think Battle Beyond the Stars holds its own with the Star Wars movies at that time, even. I mean, I remember seeing this on TV as a kid, and it just, to me as a kid, it was like, I almost thought it was another movie in the Star Wars universe when I was a little kid watching it at like 8 years old on TV.
Yeah. And then we get into the 80s, and I mean, that's a fun movie. And then there's the whole Space Raiders, Android, Forbidden World.
In the 80s, it's weird. He gets into television too, and like we have notable television.
Yeah. Like what TV are you talking about?
Wasn't there New World Television? I mean, didn't New World Television put out Wonder Years and Sledgehammer, I thought?
Yeah, I think that was... So Roger sells the company in 83. So
okay. I'm sorry.
He doesn't have much to do with that. And I think that's not the end of the Roger Corman story.
Okay, my bad. We're skipping ahead in the eras here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I mean, New World goes on to do a lot of stuff in the 80s. It's like Chud, the Philadelphia Experiment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. And then we talked about Galaxy of Terror on another podcast. And then even there's Forbidden World in that time period. The movie Android in that time period. These are all like movies kind of capitalizing on the science fiction Star Wars craze at the time. Mm-hmm. And these are all movies reusing the same sets once again, like on the same lumber yard that they were shooting from Battle Beyond the Stars, basically. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think right around the Suburbia, right around that time, I think is...
Suburbia, yeah. I knew a girl that worked on Suburbia. Talk about a super low-budget movie.
Yeah, so that's I think, when he basically... I guess he just gets an offer he can't refuse. And so, I mean, he sells New World. But I mean, he goes on to make movies for the Sci-Fi Channel later on. He
direct-to-video stuff, obviously.
Direct-to-video stuff. He has a new company called Concord Pictures.
Yeah.
That's Carnosaur, the Jurassic Park ripoff, which is pretty decent, actually. That comes out.
Yeah. It uses like old-fashioned techniques in that one. Like, well, at least as far as the animated dinosaur goes, they use go motion in that one or stop motion in that one, compared to the Jurassic Park movie. And then they have like John Carl Buechler, his main guy, effects guy, build this awesome life-size dinosaur to use. Yeah. And he builds it even cheaper than Stan Winston's, and it works, I think, even better. I don't know. No, I don't know, but I don't know that for a fact. But I mean, I saw a doc on how he built the materials for it, and I was always amazed by his makeup guy, John Carl Buechler, honestly. And I was just like, wow, man, dude built a life-size T-Rex just for nothing there, and it looks great, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's New Horizons, I think, was the company that he founded that released that one. And that was, I mean...
I think New Horizons came after Concord, maybe, yeah. I think. Because he was always just starting up companies at that point, it seemed like. Subdivisions even, maybe. But like, I worked on a movie, as I had said in previous podcasts, as an extra on a movie he produced called Space Marines. I don't know what capacity he produced it in, whether it was financing or...
Jordan, you've got to let it go. Roger Corman owes Jordan $50, and it's just like, Jordan, come on.
No, I was just talking about it was very much shot in the Corman fashion, where it was very rushed, and like even to the point where I looked down and it was like, my pant leg, it's ripped. They were like, don't worry about it. It'll look great later on, you know.
And they were right. No, but I mean, so yeah, at that time, so New Horizons is, I think it was New Horizons, but they made a deal with Showtime to remake a lot of AIP and Roger Corman movies from the 50s. This
time period, yes.
Like they remade A Bucket of Blood. They remade
and Piranha.
Humanoids from the Deep and Piranha. Black Scorpion. It's a bunch of movies, which is pretty interesting.
Black Scorpion was like their Batman, basically, almost. Success, as far as success goes as well, I guess, for them at that time on Showtime and everything, but yeah.
Yeah, Wasp Woman, things like that. So that was pretty interesting. And that came at the time, I think, when when Corman was being rediscovered and when really cult films were being rediscovered. That was the 90s, late 80s, 90s. And people were really looking back at some of these movies with some sort of nostalgia or reverence.
We're talking mid to late 90s, I guess, more.
Yeah.
You know?
And even in the 80s, people were recognizing, oh my God, half of Hollywood at some point worked for Roger Corman, or some of the biggest directors, actors, and producers, or folks in Hollywood had worked for Roger Corman. So I think he was already getting his due. Yeah, when you have a lot of the Hollywood A-listers going through the Roger Corman school, that really speaks to, I guess, his indelible impact on Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 2000s, he makes like movies for sci-fi, and so it gets really cheesy and direct-to-video and whatever. But I mean, he's got nothing.
And even cheaper at that point. I mean, Sci-Fi Channel budget is just like, you talk about, like Sci-Fi did a version of Dune around that time, around the late 90s, early 2000, and it's like it probably would look like a TV show if you watched it compared to the new version now, even the David Lynch version. But Sci-Fi did not like spend a lot of money on their productions a lot of times. Sci-Fi Channel at that time.
Definitely. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of the, an abridged version of his story there. So, Jordan, let me ask you a couple questions here. What does, given the fact that he got a lot of people their start, Coppola, Scorsese, et cetera, what does a Hollywood look like without Roger Corman? To understand his legacy, what does Hollywood look like without Roger Corman if he'd never existed?
Interesting. A Hollywood without Roger Corman at that time, I mean...
Or just today. If he'd never existed? Yeah.
If he existed, then probably the movie Woodstock was never made, also. I mean, he's a part of this era. I can't imagine a Hollywood without the people he gave jobs to or enlisted to make a movie. I can't I mean, yeah. I mean, would it just be a Hollywood with old directors at that point? If none of these young guys had come along?
I mean,
old directors from like a bygone era that weren't, if there was no easy... It's like saying, can you imagine a Hollywood without any easy writer,
Yeah, that kind of thing. And I mean, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to, I mean, who the heck knows? But
would we just still be getting like Gone with the Wind musicals? I mean, at least the science fiction would still be good.
Yeah.
We'd still be getting like bleak dystopian science fiction movies. But like we'd still probably be getting really bad musicals to where we'd be sick of it.
Exploitation is healthy, and I really for creativity Definitely. And for giving the studios the run for their money, because I think it's so many times that you're talking about like science fiction, movies like Westworld, movies like Logan's Run, at that time were made because of all this stuff that was happening. Oh man, look at these B movies out there making all this money for nothing.
Yeah,
the big studios followed suit very quickly.
That's what's interesting too, I mean, yeah, Corman did influence it all. I mean, he was a trendsetter, as these people were talking about him on documentaries, because he understood that the kids wanted more than just sugar in the movies. They wanted, or just more than just candy in the movies. Not just safe candy. They wanted alcohol in the movies and drugs in the movies. They wanted stuff that you weren't supposed to talk about in the movies. That's what kids want.
Yeah. And I think that, maybe a lot of the filmmakers of the past generation or so would still have been around, but they may have had a different track, because that's the thing, is getting your first job is the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things, I guess.
Even today, it's like, you can't really wait around. You have to kind of make your own way in this way.
And with someone like Corman putting the faith in you to write or direct a movie or whatever it is, act in a movie, I mean, that means a lot. You've got a credit, and you have a movie that's been released theatrically, and that's a big deal.
Yeah. People saw your movie at the drive-in.
So, I mean, should he be remembered? Is exploitation a dirty word? And should he be remembered for exploitation? I know he wouldn't probably agree with that.
I think we remember him more as like he finally got the Oscar, the Lifetime Achievement, before he died. I mean, he should be remembered for being maybe a mentor of sorts at the same time. Absolutely. And like, he always was inspiring as like a guy that just would be like, if you had an inner Roger Corman and you were thinking about making a movie or something like that, your inner Roger Corman would just say, what's stopping you? Go do it.
I hear he was very hands off in a almost in a challenging way. Like, hey, here, like I said, here you go, make this movie. And I always thought he was a little bit more, I wouldn't say meddling, but like critical or micromanaging, but apparently wasn't at all. I guess if you're working on 6 films at a time, you've got other things to do, and then you're planning your next 6. Yeah. So I think he just put a lot of faith in people, at least in that golden era there, the 60s and 70s, to do your thing.
That's what I hear. He was very hands off. Like, unless something was really a problem, or obviously unless you had to add nudity to something and you didn't want to, that's when he'd step in. Or but yeah, it seems like he was hands off most of the time. If you knew what you were doing and you looked like you knew what you were doing to him,
So, okay, going back, I guess, to the notable names, but without those notable names, how much of that is his legacy too? If he hadn't spawned a Bogdanovich, or I guess whoever else, I'm sort of
James Cameron,
Gail
Earhart, or Francis Coppola, or John Sayles, or Ron
Demme,
Howard,
or anybody,
or Jonathan Demme,
and James Horner too. Oh man, we talked about Humanoids from the Deep, that score.
I mean, he had James Horner on 2 movies before he'd even done Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. But yeah, you're right. I mean, even James Horner, even the composer James Horner.
I mean, it's not just actors and directors, but anyway, how much of his legacy is just the names he got started? The fact that a lot of the people who worked with him, and there's a ton of people who worked with Roger Corman that aren't A-listers. I'm sure they do great work, but they're just not A-listers. But because of the handful that did, was that just because he made 400 movies? And it was just, I mean, or how much of his legacy is just the names of those people that worked with him? Would we still be talking about Roger Corman if he just made these same movies, but they just weren't with like notable people?
Yeah. I mean, you bring that up, like James Gunn, who's notable, started under Lloyd Kaufman at Troma.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
oh, he'd be like a Lloyd Kaufman.
How many people know James Gunn over Lloyd Kaufman? You know, I don't know, man. I mean,
get that's brilliant. That's exactly what you're right. He would be a Fred Olin Ray. He would be a.
These people have to kind of branch out on their own, and despite starting with Corman, a lot of times.
Yeah.
You're right, though. I don't know if anybody younger knows Corman, who he is.
Probably not.
Above anybody like 40 right now, maybe.
Unless you're really deep into film.
Unless you're really deep in film like the rest of us. Or unless you're a film nerd hipster, I don't know.
I'm sure there was a Roger Corman of the 30s or 40s that we don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
That's
but yeah,
Kroger Bab.
I think part of his
Kroger Bab was his name, Anthony. Listen to
He made 100 talkies, they said. The man of 100 ankles.
No, his movies were exploitive as well.
He would show an ankle at the drop of a hat. And
that's a real name, Kroger Bab. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I thought that was a supermarket chain for a minute there. Anyway,
yeah, I don't know. You're right. I don't know how many younger people know, like people 12, like know who Roger Corman is, or people 20 know who Roger Corman is.
Well, they probably don't know who Scorsese is, even though he's 110 still making movies. But
is he 110? I'm Martin Scorsese. Don't you tell me. I directed Flowers of the Killer fucking Moon.
I think that part of his legacy is who he gave the first shots to, and I guess that's a crapshoot there. I mean, he couldn't have known necessarily. He probably picked some very talented people, but I think also the time and place, the 60s, the 70s, the studio systems were sort of failing. Big studios were yielding to smaller independent companies who were doing things cheaper and quicker. And I think that he just came at a perfect time when that American New Wave was coming through. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And even though I say like younger people, almost everybody older in the industry, like it was flooded in like all the social media. All the older people in the industry were all like, oh my God, rest in peace, Roger Corman. Most of the people. Although Paul Schrader, I don't know why he looked at a little sour grapes in his Facebook feed about Roger Corman, but he did. He kind of looked like, well, he passed on 2 of my movies in the mid-'70s and we took him to New World. I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't be applauded that much. And some people were really kind of broken up over it. But
I'm sure he was a polarizing person. Oh, I mean, let's not pretend that. I mean, every interview he comes across as like, oh, I invented the wheel. And it's not quite that simple. The story of anyone's life is not you're either a hero or a villain.
Yeah.
I think to many people, that's the same things that made him admirable, or the same traits like his cheapness.
Yeah.
Things like that, his demanding nature, his inflexibility, things like that were probably rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I mean, he didn't pay you $50, right?
I'm sure he still owes me $50. Oh my God. I wasn't going to bring that up on this podcast. I'm sorry.
Let it go, Jordan. I brought it up.
It's okay. The man's gone now. He may have not had nothing to do with it. His name was merely releasing Space Marines. He may have not been the money guy behind the movie.
He was probably looking at it. He was like, make sure that Jordan gets paid. This one person on this list, I want to make sure that they get their $50.
I wasn't on Roger Corman's naughty or nice list. Is that what you're saying? God damn it. I failed.
Or maybe it was more like he complained about the gun and the costume. I don't think we should pay him.
It was in the stunt coordinator's notes. Also, the man who handed him his voucher said that he smoked cigarettes in the wrong area of the building.
We can get out of our contract with him for that reason. So, Jordan, what? Okay, final thoughts. Roger Corman. Movies people should check out. I think we've named a lot of them.
Oh my God. Okay, yeah. Watch his Poe movies, of course, namely The Pit and the Pendulum, The Fall of the House of Usher. Those are actually really well-made movies that he did. The Trip is a really fascinating movie, but don't watch it sober. At least smoke something good before that, or, eat a good edible before, and maybe something alcoholic to go with it to, wash it down. Because it is a trip movie. It's a trippy
Jordan, you're
movie.
going to have all these people riding the unicorn, damn it.
I want you all to ride the unicorn with me, people.
But anyway, yeah, check out some of these crazy movies if you're into that exploitation stuff.
Yeah, check out Wild Angels. Even the Wild Angels. I think you can find it maybe. But
get loaded, ride your machines, watch
get loaded
Wild Angels
before you do
Angels. But anyway, definitely a loss. First out, it was easy to we've made a lot of fun of Roger Corman.
Yeah,
I guess on this episode and prior. But I mean, going back over his filmography, and I was just like, you know what? A world without Roger Corman is probably less of a gritty, more exploitative place. But
when you and I met, I was surprised you knew who Roger Corman was. Even that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like I was surprised you knew the movie Wild in the Streets. I was also surprised, he knows Roger Corman. That was almost like my Rorschach test for friends. They were into cinema. Does he know Roger Corman?
And maybe that should be for everyone else.
Let me educate him on Roger Corman.
He made 300 movies, and there's about 25 that are pretty interesting. So that's not bad.
Wow.
I'm kidding. Maybe more like 50. Okay, fair enough. But anyway, no, I think it's a great loss. I think he did a lot for a lot of people, and I think a lot of his movies were pretty interesting, despite the fact that he had this squeezing or stretching every dollar as far as it could go kind of philosophy. So, Roger, if you can hear us, you will be missed. You were a big part of my movie education and childhood, watching a lot of this stuff. So, yeah, thanks.
Me too. Yeah, I will say the same thing. Roger, rest in peace, man. One for me, one for my Roger. I'll pour the whiskey over your grave.
How many stars do you give Roger Corman? No, I'm kidding. Anyway,
as a leader, 5 stars. As a human, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go there. I'm just kidding.
Just kidding. Anyway, so thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this rambling retrospective about some guy you may or may not have heard about. We appreciate it. Listen to some of our other episodes. We've certainly reviewed a lot of Roger Corman movies or New World movies, it turns out.
If anything, I was going to say, check out the New World movies at your local library or local streaming services, whatever. The New World movies were Roger Corman produced. Look for Roger Corman produced early 80s horror movies, and you'll find some interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's for sure. But so if you like this, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell random people on the street. Dial numbers at random and tell them that you like this podcast.
That's right. Tell your rabbi, tell your confessor.
Subscribe, all that stuff. But thank you. And Jordan, it's been great talking to you about movies.
It's been great getting loaded and talking to you about movies, Anthony, and going against the establishment and the man with you. You know what? I think we should go out with a bang, Anthony. Let's go out on our choppers. Okay. We're wild. We're no angels. Okay. The robots took my podcast.
All trailers, clips, music, or any other copyrighted material are used sparingly, edited from their original forms, and used for the purposes of criticism, discussion, commentary, and education about these fine films.